Hey, actually, we have a tradition of embarrassing people on their birthday. However, birthday boy's not in the house, but I made a video, so I'm going to show it, all right? I texted him and I said, hey, wherever you are, you should watch this. Matt turned 30. Can you guys believe it? Woohoo! Matt Wall. We have a little video on his birthday on Friday. They opened Chair 9 again just for this weekend, which means Dragon's Tail back, and here's Matt on Dragon's Tail. First time ever. He got to right there and he's like, woo! Out loud on the video. It was awesome. Oh my gosh. Happy birthday, Matt. We love you. Wherever you are. I don't think he's far, but I don't think he's near. Okay. You're welcome. Hey, this is the most New Zealand we've had right in the front ever. This is awesome. Let's clap. Come on, this is great. We got a big portion of the Wells family, and pretty awesome. Hang out sometimes at the lighthouse, I think maybe in Wanaka and all that stuff. But hey, this is great. Let's just pray one more time. I just have a prayer I want to pray. You can choose to join if you want. In your heart, not out loud. Lord, would you help us to feast on your word this week? Would you stir up a hunger in our hearts, in our minds, just that we'd just be hungry to dive in and to discover what you have to say and what you've said already, and that you could connect dots for us, that we'd encounter you alive, fresh, and super relevant, just like Karen was sharing, testimonies of you interacting with us. But would you also do that through your word this week? Help us to have open hearts to you and to go after you. Amen. I don't know if this is the Lord, but when I was walking over here, there's a song from a band from way back, and the song goes like this: a place where no one locks their doors. It's a song about an old man who the singer is hoping will find a place where he can be and feel safe again, as though he's not in that place now. And I was just thinking about, man, a place where no one locks their doors, a place where you feel so safe, where you can be yourself. And I just had this random thought. I wonder if some of us have recently been hurt by people we thought were safe. And maybe we should pray for those of us who are feeling like that. Is there anybody here who's feeling like, man, I thought this was a safe place, and I could refer to anything. And you're just like in this place of just being kind of burned, kind of hurt. It's kind of a bold move, huh? Is there anybody that would like prayer in that area, just as we start? All right. We'll have a think about it. At the end, we have a few folks that'll pray over here. And if that's you, God can stitch your heart back together. He can restore what maybe feels like it's been taken away. He can give you more than what you had. I have loads of stories from my own life where he's given me way more than I thought I lost. So, awesome. All right, on a slightly lighter topic, can I have 2 volunteers, John Winkleman and Chris Nelson? You guys would be great. Come on up. And is there anyone else who would consider themselves a bit of a gearhead? You really like cars? Marcus? Okay. Anybody else? Any car lovers? You can be from any part of the world. I want to play a little car game. Is there anybody else? You love cars? Come on up. It's your first. I have never seen you, but just come on up. This is great. Let's clap for him. All right. So, and what was your name?
James. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. This is John the Winkleman. Christopher the Nelson. These 2 guys, and maybe you as well, hate being in front of you. So I wasn't going to wait. But here's what I wanted to do real quick. You guys are all a team. Actually, Jeremiah, can you come up too? He loves cars. You guys are all a team, okay? We're not fighting each other here. But here's what I wanted to do, just for kicks. This goes along with the point we were making at the beginning of last Sunday's hangout. I just want to throw some car company names at you, and I just want you to throw models at me. Just anything that you think of, just kind of let them go. And I'm going to just check some boxes on my sheet of glory. Does that make sense? So I'll just say like Subaru, and you just go, any models you can think of. Hey, Karen's playing. Just shout them out real loud. Are you going to direct it to one person? No. Well, I don't know how it's going to go. What do you guys think we should do? How about this? I'm going to give the mic to you, and you start.
Okay. All right. Forester, WRX. Well, you could say Impreza. Now they're helping. I don't know any else. What other ones? Outback, Legacy, Tribeca. So we're all playing as a team now.
Chevy.
Who wants to do Chevy? Suburban. Tahoe. Well, Tahoe's not really one. Camaro. Corvette. Well, pickup. Astro. Cruise. He's looking for something specific. GMC counts too. Blazer, Yukon. I think Yukon's actually is it ZR2. That's a package, isn't it? Avalanche. Colorado. S10. S15 is GMC. So, I think I've had the mic long enough. When you asked Jeremiah, ask for Toyota.
Altima. GTR. Cube. Frontier, Pathfinder. What else? Xterra.
Armada. There was something else in there. What's the other one?
Sentra.
Maxima. Okay. What else you got? We're doing Mercedes next down at the other end.
You get the money.
Yeah, and it just start GL 450, ML 350, 450, 550, C-Class.
The SLKs.
Yeah.
Ooh, Glunderwagen.
G-Wagon.
Those are the bomb.
Toyota. We're going to 66.
Toyota.
Toyota. Who's got it? Here we go.
Land Cruiser, Previa,
Okay.
Sienna, Hilux,
Highlander.
Highlander, Prius, the Prado, Tercel, RAV4, Corolla. We already said that once.
All right, Hondas. Accord.
Accord, Civic,
CRV.
CRV,
Ridgeline.
Pilot, Ridgeline, Odyssey.
All right, we're about 10 away from 66, so we're getting close here. All right, you want Ford next? All right, we got Fords. What do we got?
F-150, F-250, F-350, F-450, 550, 650.
That's good. Explorer, Expedition.
Edge.
Yep, all those. No. Mustang,
Escort. Ford Escort.
Escort, Explorer,
We could go European
Expedition.
here.
All right. Can you give these guys a hand? Come on. All right. So last week we did words in a song, just to illustrate something. We did like 6 car brands out of like 20 plus on my list. we have random information stored in our heads. Some of it's really helpful and it means a lot. For example, one of the 4 is a car mechanic and makes a living fixing cars. So that's good, that's relevant, that's important. But a lot of the info that we have in our heads, it's not that helpful, it's not that relevant, doesn't mean that much. But it's all there. And so I have this thought, what if we were to try to put some stuff in our head that we want there? To go along with all the other stuff. We can keep all that other stuff in there. So last week we had a confessional time of the song that you love the most, that you're embarrassed that you know every word to. And we had 3 volunteers, out of the goodness of their hearts, sing us a song. It was incredible. We had Joan Jett. We had a little Whitney Houston from the sound booth. I'm Every Woman from Patrick. Holy, that was great. And then Ryan pulled the hair thing out of his hair and did some Shania. And it was just way more than I dreamed of. I was hoping for Mariah Carey, but those notes are high, and I respect that. We can't all sing like her, and so we didn't. But the point was the same, and I put some lyrics up there from Don McLean's song, just looking at how small 66 words is. That's how many books we have in the Bible, and yet a good portion of us don't know them. We don't know 66 words. And yet, Don McLean's song is like 4 columns of lyrics. And it's not even one full column. And yet we can all sing along with Bye Bye Miss American Pie, da-da-da-da-da, Chevy, blah, blah, Dry, all that stuff. See, car reference. Do you see how we just brought that together? So I want to work a little bit, if you're a part of this family especially, on us growing in learning some of the basics about the Bible. Now, my heart is not that we're all going to be experts. I actually don't care if you know how to spell the words at all. What I'm actually after is, do you understand the story? Do you get what the pieces are and how they kind of fit together? Because the Bible's a really big book. Has anybody read a book that's bigger than the Bible in this room? Okay, Angela has. Anybody else? Okay, maybe 3, maybe 4. We got a head scratch and Jeremiah, plus my wife. So there's not a lot of books that have that much in them and that we're trying to learn. So it really can be a little bit intimidating. And I know some of us are really good at memorizing things, and some of us are not. That's okay. But I still want to take wherever we're at right now and go forward from that point. So if you can only think of 2 books in the Bible, that's great. Maybe you'll have 4 by the end of us chatting. Maybe you'll have 15. So last week we did a pop quiz, just like a blind pop quiz. Nobody knew we were doing it except for me and my wife, but she was in kids' church. And this week we're not going to do a quiz. But I would love if you guys could hand these out to everybody. I want to just go through the books of the Bible together, and then we're going to revisit what we looked at last time with the different sections of the Old Testament and how they fit together. And also, could Ryan and Lauren, could you grab those pens? They're just behind you on the table, and make sure everybody has a pen. So one side of this sheet is the books of the Bible, the Old Testament, and the other side is a little 3-column table. And it has 3 words: the era, person, and the book of the Bible. So I just want to stitch a couple pieces together and see if we can build something together. See if we can build a little bit, go a little deeper. And Patty, if you want to throw the, I don't know, one of the slides up that's relevant to what I'm talking about. What are we talking about? Does anybody have a clue where we are? Timothy. We'll look at that passage in a sec. Let's go a little further. Okay, let's stay there. Does anybody else need a pen? Ryan? Oh, that's mine. Thank you. This is actually mine. Okay. So if you turn to the page that says Books of the Old Testament, you'll notice I left 2 gaps. I left them on purpose. There's 66 books total, but there's a few different ways you can break them down into categories. And so this is the beginning of the discussion, okay? This is not the end of the discussion. So some of you are wondering, How come you didn't label the top 5 books on the left column? You'll have to wait till another week. We're not going there today. I'm not going to tell you that's the Pentateuch or the books of Moses. We're not covering that stuff here. We're just going to look at it real brief. Can everybody look up at the screen for just one sec? So the red column, basically, if you read the books in the left column, you're going to get the story, the history, kind of the big pieces of the Old Testament. It's mostly narrative. Narrative is story. And then if you're looking for a little bit more along the lines of wisdom, wrestling with good and evil, wrestling with love, what's that all about? Looking at relationships. Is everything futile? Is there any value anywhere in the universe? You're going to find these discussions, these wisdom books, in that little section of 5 in the top right column. And then the last super column in blue is the prophets. And obviously that could be broken down into other categories. But one of the things I wanted to point out was, hey, it's not that difficult to go, hey, there's 5 books in the first 5, and there's 5 books in the wisdom. Okay, that's 10. Boom. That's like Subaru and Chevy. We just did that just now together. And you guys all figured that out. Or at least the 4 guys up front did. And so can we just take a minute and write down the different books just to actually like start the repetition of trying to learn some of this stuff? If you're new and visiting and you don't want to, don't bother. Just draw like a little comic cartoon or something on your page. And if you just walked in and you want to grab a sheet and figure out what people are doing, maybe Sierra can help you figure things out. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the first 5. There's a cheater way to memorize those 5. It's like this: Moses 1, Moses 2, Moses 3, 4, and 5. Because in most languages that I've bumped into, that's how they do the first 5 books. Then we have Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. So you're going to have story in that whole column. You're going to kind of get what's happening in people's lives. But when you switch over to the wisdom books, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, you're not going to find a lot of stories. You'll find little metaphors and illustrations and anecdotes of people doing things really well and poorly. But you're not going to find straight up storytelling that much. And then jumping into the prophets, the first 5 prophets, Isaiah through Daniel, are called the major prophets simply because they're longer. They're really big books. And the rest, starting at Hosea down, are the minor prophets, not because they have no value or because they got kicked to the curb by their bigger brother or sister. They simply were shorter. So minor refers to smaller. And so the prophets, literally prophetic writings to the people of God. Kind of a silly question, but I think it's worth asking. Is there anything prophetic that's not in the prophets? Oh, there is. Okay. Okay, here's another one, Ryan and Rebecca. Is there any wisdom outside of the wisdom books? Okay. Can you think of any history that's in the prophetic books? There sure is. A lot of Daniel stories telling what's going on. So these are just big, broad strokes so that we can start to build and put together some of the structure, some of the spine, and then we'll flesh out the rest later. Does that metaphor work for anyone? So obviously there's prophetic stuff in someone like Moses or Elijah or whatever, but that's not labeled as a prophetic book. That's just in the narrative, and so on and so on. So here's the rough books. Oh, I didn't read through the prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And then the minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And again, I mentioned this last week, if you come from a Catholic tradition or different Orthodox backgrounds, you're going to have a few bonus books that aren't on this list. We're not going to talk about those today, but they can be kind of fascinating. Check them out. All right, how's your writing going? Are we getting close? We're done. All right. I've just heard a few people say, I'm not that good at memorizing stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but have you even tried? Because sometimes if you write 66 words down once a month for the month of June, there's a good chance you're going to know them pretty well. Another thing you can do is there's this new app, it's called YouTube, and it's starting to catch on. And on YouTube, people actually have recorded themselves singing the books of the Bible in a song. A lot of them are terrible. I sampled them recently. Here's why. They shouldn't be more than 1 minute. And they'll have these 5-minute long songs. And you're like, okay, it's only 66 words, people. This shouldn't be that complicated. So anyways, the reason your page doesn't have 66 is because we're not doing the New Testament today. So if you're confused by the number 39, I'm sorry I didn't explain it sooner. Okay, so the books of the Bible, of the Old Testament, right in front of you. Patty, could you go to the next slide? Last week I gave 3 challenges, and the second or third challenge was, if you choose to accept, read through the big picture narrative of the Old Testament. In other words, read through the books that just tell the main parts of the story. And so I made a little list for you, and if anybody shot a snapshot on their phone or jotted them down, it would be the books in black. That doesn't mean that Esther or Chronicles or Deuteronomy don't have narrative in them. It just means if you're kind of wondering what the Bible's all about, what's the Old Testament all about? If you read those, however many, 7 or 8 books in a row, in that order, you will get the big picture story from the beginning of creation right up to the return when Israel, the nation, starts to go back to the land. They leave exile and they return to Israel and start rebuilding. So for some of us, like myself, I grew up without understanding the big picture. I understand that God is the creator. I knew God is love. I knew a bunch of things like that. But I didn't understand, how do you get from Moses in Exodus to the judges and then into a bunch of kings? I never understood, where did Ezra and Nehemiah fit into anything? Why are they rebuilding a wall in the first place? Why are they rebuilding the temple? What happened to the temple? I didn't get how all the pieces come together. And so if you're like I was and you're wondering, what is the big picture story? Those are the books. You cruise through those black ones, you'll get the big picture story. Then what you do is you go back and you sprinkle in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, a little Ruth and Chronicles and Esther, and it fills in more of the story. But if you just want to get the big picture, that's where you want to be. So maybe put a little star beside those ones. If you were like me, just going, I don't get it. I don't see how this matters. Why is most of it about Jewish people? I don't have the video clip, but one of my favorite stories is a guy called John Wimber. And he was a big deal in Vegas in the 60s and 70s. And then eventually God used him to help kind of kick the Vineyard into high gear, which is a church denomination type thing. And he started to realize his life was falling apart. His wife was going to leave him. Everything was sort of crumbling, even though he was really successful managing and performing with this band. And he went up to a bartender one night and said, I think I need to find out about God, or something like that. And the bartender said, you need a Bible. And so he went to the Christian bookstore in the middle of the night in Vegas, and they were closed. And that was confusing, because that's when the people who need the Bible the most can't get the Bible. Anyways, his telling of the story is just crazy funny. But he finally gets his hand on a Bible, and it's red, and it's only half a Bible, and he was confused. And so he started reading it, and then he's like, this isn't the story of God. This is the story of Jewish people. Like, what is happening here? And he went back to the bartender, and the bartender's like, no way, that Bible's not black. It's not a real Bible. And he's like, I knew it. I knew it's not a real Bible. But we all have these different things that we don't get, or we weren't given the full story. And sometimes we just stay there. And rather than stay there, I would love for us to start asking those questions in community and start discovering, are there any answers for my questions? What are the things I don't get? What are the things you don't get? So, Jamie, what's one of the things you don't get about the Bible? Well, thank you for asking, Mike. One of the things I still don't get is exactly what we're supposed to do with the book of Revelation. I have a few ideas, and so I decided a couple years ago to try to study it, and I've been interrupted a lot. We've had 2 kids, and but I've been trying, at different points to dig in because I don't want that book to be a mystery to me in terms of how and what I can do with it. I don't have to understand every detail. I get that. It's illustration, it's metaphor, it's extreme, it's apocalyptic as a genre, and we'll talk about it another day. But sometimes we have to figure out what the topics are that we don't get and spend some time there and dig in a little bit. And so if the big picture is something you need to dig into, that's where you want to be. That will help you out a lot. The other thing we did a little bit last week is started to take the big picture story that you'll find in those black books and simplify it down to sections. Sections that are called eras. That's a common word used in history. And so if you want to flip your paper over, and Patty, if you want to flip to the next slide, we talked about the Old Testament being broken down into just 8 sections. And if you were here, you wrote these down last week. Creation, the story of God creating everything. Patriarchs. Remember when God told Abraham just to go, leave your family? That's the patriarch, the beginning of the patriarchs. That's Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, or whatever his wife's name is. Jacob, and just that whole thing, how it unfolds through to Joseph, and that's when they get to Egypt, right, with Joseph. And then things go a little sideways. Pharaoh gets insecure in Egypt, and you have a need for an exodus from Egypt because the people are no longer free. The Israelites are enslaved. And so that's what the exodus, that leaving the land of Egypt, and God promised them their own land. And so the conquest is the beginning of going after that land. Figuring it out. Where is the land? Okay. And then how do we get there? And what do we do when we're there? And what are the things that God told them to do when they're there? And then once they're in the land, they needed people to lead. And so God raised up people who would walk with him, and they were called judges. And they would lead the people, but they weren't kind of an all-powerful. They were like on behalf of God. And the people weren't happy with that and said, we want to be like all the other nations. We want a king. In other words, we want someone to have all the power. And he eventually relented and said, okay, fine, but this is not the best way. And so, number 6, the era or the section of the Old Testament that begins with Saul being kind of a terrible king right off the bat. And then that transitioning to David and Solomon, and then things getting messy with David's sons and Solomon, and then the kingdom eventually breaks into pieces and at different times in different ways. And you have all these stories unfolded of the kings being good and the kings being bad, and there's the kings in Israel and the kings in Judah, and eventually that leads to God kind of giving some ultimatums. Hey, if you don't turn to me, if you don't let go of your idol worship and your this and all these things they're doing that are breaking God's heart, I'm going to take the land away from you. Your identity is in the land. It needs to be in me. I'm going to show you what that looks like. And eventually, both the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah got punked by Babylon and by other kingdoms, and they went into exile. Assyria was involved, and eventually the Persians as well. So they're in exile. Like, remember Daniel and all his pals get, scooped up from their land and taken to Babylon? That's exile. Exile means removed from the land and not where you want to be. I don't mean that's the official definition. I just mean that's what's happening. And so eventually the people turn back to God. And God says, all right. And they start heading back to the land. They return to the land. And at that point, the Old Testament ends. And there's a big chunk in there, a big gap. And so number 9, it's not on your sheet, but number 9 would be silence. Because there's 400 years of silence in between the 2 periods where the Old Testament ends and where John the Baptist kind of surfaces and Jesus appears on the scene in the Gospels. But we're not going to go there. We're going to stay here. So this is the eras. Now there's another column. And before you go to the next slide, Patty, Does anybody want to take a stab at listing one person from each of the eras? Ryan's coming up to give it a shot in front of all of you. Here he is, Ryan the Harris.
Adam, Abraham, Moses, Joshua, Samuel, because he's my favorite, David, Daniel, Ezra.
There you go. Check that out. All right, let's see that next slide, Patty. Let's see the goodness. All right. So the point here is not that you memorize my 8, which I mostly stole from a book that I think is really great. The point is, do you understand the pieces and the people that were involved and how they relate? So I don't have a 4th column, but if I did, it would look like this. Adam and Eve were created by God to steward everything. Abraham and Sarah stepped out and left everything they knew. Moses was afraid to be the voice and the leaders of the people, but God eventually brought his brother, and they led the people out of Egypt. And on and on. Can you just tell the story? Do you understand the segues? One of the things that I grew up with was David was the king. He was awesome. He slayed the bear and the lion and Goliath and all that. But I didn't understand how David connected in the story to Joseph. How did he connect to Ruth? What was going on with Naomi anyways? How do the pieces connect to one another? So these are the main folks, or just a list of main folks. If you also want to come up with segue or connecting the dots, people who connect the dots, you can do that. So an example would be Samuel. Samuel, God raised up to kind of be a leader, a prophetic voice, but he kind of bridges that era of judges into kings or kingdom. So if it's helpful this week, you can research that on your own. Different people that would connect in between. The in-between the lines people. But I also wanted to point out, remember those books in black? And I said, these are the ones that tell the big picture story. I put most of them into the book column for you so you can kind of see how the books of the Bible are telling the story. And tables don't help everybody. So if you're more of a timeline person, you can turn this on its side and go for it. But Genesis is the book for Adam and for Abraham and their adventures. Exodus for Moses. Numbers and Joshua both kind of tell the story of the conquest. In other words, of them figuring out the land and trying to take over it and be faithful to God in the land. And then the judges are judging or ruling while they are already in the land. And then you have the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, unfolding the story of the end of judging right through all the kings of Israel and Judah. And the reason I put 2 stars for the exile is we don't really have a narrative book that just tells the story of what it was like in exile. Now, the book of Daniel tells a lot of stories, but it doesn't tell just kind of the general story of exile. So if you want to put the book of Daniel in there, you could, but we don't really have one specific that just tells the story. But then you get to Ezra and Nehemiah, and you start to get the picture from Ezra's perspective of what the return to the land began to look like. Or Nehemiah's story, what it looked like for him to start to return and rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. So does that kind of make sense? Okay. It's not too scary. I don't mind scaring you a little, but not a lot. You know it's church. It's not like a movie like that's playing right now across the street. It's not that one. All right, the eras. Hey, a check-in on challenges from last week. Last week we had a few challenges. Let's see if we have them listed up here. Mrs. Bell. Challenges. Just hit me with the next slide. The one right after this one. Okay. Did anybody read the book of John? All right. Was it awesome? Cool. If you are new to the Bible, if you don't know Jesus, if this whole thing is you're foreign, the book of John is a really good place to start. And so I just kind of put that out there as if you're new or you're interested or intrigued at all, find a Bible. We have some in the back and the bottom. left of that table. Just take one home, it's yours, and read the Gospel of John. That means the good news that John tells. Challenge number 2. Did anybody read the narrative books and ask God to breathe life into their understanding? Okay. Number 3, did anybody read or reread a book of the Bible they did not know very well or could not pronounce? Outside of Ryan, because we already talked about it. Lauren. Well, there you go. What did you read?
Ezra and Nehemiah.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. Okay. Did anybody take a risk and share the familyness of God or extend God's family heart to anyone this week and accept the outreach challenge? She just graduated second year. She's way ahead of all of us. God just told her and she did it. Okay, so that's awesome. Patty helped buy someone's groceries who couldn't afford all their groceries and then shared Jesus with the person. That's awesome, Patty. Super cool. Well, these challenges don't expire. You can accept them at any point you like. But I have some new ones. So can we take a look at the new challenges? There we go. Number 1, read the book of John. Not that new. Number 2, these are the books that almost everybody misses on my quiz. Okay? Did you guys know there was a book called Nahum? Okay, what about Obadiah? Okay, did anybody get, well, we didn't do the New Testament, but those books nobody seems to read or know, at least when I quiz people. So this week, if you would like to, accept the challenge of reading Numbers. Some of my favorite passages are in Numbers. Let me just explain this quickly. You can, as you're reading and you see the actual numbers being listed, scan them briefly. You don't have to try to pronounce or memorize all of it. There are crazy stories and prayers of blessing in Numbers that will change your life. Jude and Philemon are super tiny. You can read it in 10 minutes. Obadiah is tiny too, and Ryan read it this week and loved it. He texted me. Okay, if you would like a deeper challenge than just reading the goodness that God is sharing through His Word, I have put 5 words up here that you need to take a shot with your phone and research what these words mean. You don't have to use Wikipedia. I just mean, have a look, I dare you, to see if you can come up with, what is Tanakh, Torah, Ketuvim, Nevi'im, and the Septuagint? Okay, we'll talk a little bit about it next week. It directly relates to everything we've talked about today, believe it or not. And finally, Patty, you don't need to listen to this part. You'll just do it. Discuss with a friend this week who does not know Jesus what their view of the Bible is. Now, I didn't say tell them your view. Okay, they're different. Just ask them what their view is. You don't even have to say anything. But it sometimes will open up fascinating conversations. So, Natalie, do I need to explain anything that I said a little better? Okay, Natalie's going to keep me accountable that I didn't miss something or forget to say something. Okay. Here's what I wanted to end with. I've created a confessional because we're such an official church, and we don't really have any. So here we go. Are you guys ready? You don't have to agree with these, but I just want to put them out there right in front of you. The Bible is God's Word. There's a lot of people that don't believe that. The Bible is God-breathed, God-inspired. And number 3, and potentially the most important, the Bible is true. See, if I don't believe that the Bible is God's Word, I'm not going to apply it to my life. I'm not going to try to live it out. I'm not going to search it for wisdom. Why would I? There's so many other books I could find wisdom in. If the Bible is not true, why would I try to do what it says? I'll find truth somewhere else and do that. I'm not going to do the Bible if I don't think it's true. And a lot of people don't think the Bible is really God-inspired. It's a collection of writings, yes. And they may be occasionally relevant, but it's certainly not God-breathed, God-inspired. So I just wanted to put these out here to end. We're going to actually end in prayer. But just to kind of leave those lingering a little bit and maybe annoy some of us. To pray a prayer that goes something like this. God, is the Bible your word? Did you inspire and breathe life into it? And is it true? That's round one. Round two would be something like this. If you think God spoke to you a yes on one or any of those, you could pray something like this. So then what should I do about that? I didn't think the Bible was true. I think you're saying it is. What now? Do I need to make some changes? Do I need to dive in and start reading it? What do I do? See, because in a lot of ways, God's way more of a gentleman than we let him be. We've seen weird people do weird things in God's name. To some of us directly. And we think God's like that. And he's actually not. And so just letting God define what he says and believes about his word is something some of us have maybe never done before. So how would you pray a prayer like that? I would pray it the exact way I just said it. So let's stand up and we'll do it. This is my version of a prayer that you can think of a better one. I'm sure you will. But you got to leave my slide up, Patty, so I don't mess up all the words. All right, this is me praying this. It's a lot of pressure. Lord, is the Bible your word? I'm just praying it right here, standing on the carpet in the church. But you could pray it at the coffee shop or on the mountain. Lord, is this actually inspired by you? These words in this book. And God, is this true? I don't know if I believe that it is. Help me in the places where I don't believe. Show me that it's true and that it's your word. Amen. That's what I would do. I don't care where I am. I would pray anywhere you can think of. However you would talk, that's how I would talk. You don't have to be weird. You don't have to talk different when you pray. You don't even have to say anything out loud. God knows your heart. He knows where you're at. He loves you right where you're at. So, Lord, if there are those of us that have been hurt this recently by people that we thought were safe, we trusted people or in situations and we've been burned, Lord, would you bring healing as well to hearts, to minds? Would you bring the sensitivity down when you've just kind of been banged around, just been hurt, and everything's just so vivid and so over the top? Would you help us to come back to a normal in our emotions and in our reactions? Would you help us to forgive people who've hurt us and to trust that you are the judge, that you'll take care of everything? We just have to forgive and trust you. Lord, help us to be hungry this week, to feast on what you've given us in your word. And would you speak to us through the Bible, through the stories, through the wisdom, prophetic words directly into our life for today.
I have one more question for you. Amen. How has God shown you the answer to those questions?
Wow. I know we went overtime kind of, so I don't want to answer it long. What were the questions? How is the Bible God breathed? I'm going home to have dinner, okay? I'm hungry. I'm Michael Dalton's brother. I think probably the shortest thing I can think to say without telling a bunch of stories would be the way that I've discovered these things to be worth our while and true. I just asked God to help me to be hungry. And he did. And I've told this story a bunch. But I didn't care about the Bible. I was not interested in people preaching. I left the room whenever that would happen. And I would come back after they finished and experience the worship later and the prayer times and stuff. And so one day, I just confessed to God. That's why I like confessionals. I was like, God, you say that your word matters and that it's important and that it's life and it's not to me. So would you change that? And he did over a period of years. It didn't happen right away. But now I love it. Now, I'm not hungry every day. I'm not feasting all the time. That's why I'm praying that same prayer with us. Because I know I want more of that in my life. But I've just seen God answer a prayer like that. And then, once I discovered that I had the slightest interest in hearing what he said as I read through the scripture, he would speak to me things. It was like just flipping a page, and it's like God's got a highlighter, and he's highlighting words, and they're for me. I'm like, this is awesome. I didn't even know this was in here. I've never seen that in my life. And it's speaking life to who I am today and situations and things that are happening. So I started to experience the aliveness, the inspiration, the breathing that God does through his word. And it would impact me right then and there and also going forward. Is that long enough or short enough? Okay, there's lots of stories, but do you want to close then? Okay, no more questions. Hey, if you guys need prayer, we're going to have a couple folks over here. You need healing. You need encouragement. You don't know God. They'd love to introduce you to him. If you have questions about this, you can talk to my wife because she clearly knows all the answers. And otherwise, we'll see you Wednesday night, 5:30. We're going to be painting. We're going to be sanding. Bring clothes you can get dirty. And just be ready to feast physically and then to get